Welcome back, everyone. I'm Jordan Giesige, and this is The Limiting Factor. In the last video of the Terawatt compute series, I showed that around 100 gigawatts of additional power is available on the US grid that's relatively easily accessible, which roughly matches the additional compute demand from AI that's expected by 2030. However, increasing pushback against data centers means that over the next 3 to 5 years, tech companies will likely start building their own generation off-grid. And after that, into the 2030s, space-based compute will become increasingly viable. So today, I'll cover how power generation for off-grid data centers will evolve, and how that could affect the end-to-end power supply of data centers. And in the following video, we'll look at the challenges, opportunities, and economics of space-based compute. Before we begin, a special thanks to my Patreon supporters, YouTube members, and Twitter subscribers, as well as Rebellionaire.com. They specialize in helping investors manage concentrated positions. Rebellionaire can help with covered calls, risk management, and creating a money master plan from your financial first principles. Elon has stated that on Earth's surface, over 90% of the compute will be distributed, or edge compute. That's the type of compute that will be in devices like mobile phones, robots like Optimus, and self-driving vehicles like the Cybercab. The other 10% will be centralized compute that's used, for example, to train the software models that go into those devices. That 10% appears to be what Elon was referring to when he announced his goal of 1 terawatt of compute. I'll mostly be focused on centralized compute in this video, but I will provide a brief overview of the distributed compute challenge. So what's the best way to rapidly build out 1 terawatt of off-grid generation? Off-Grid.AI.us already crunched the numbers, and the best option is to use up to around 90 to 95% solar and battery generation, with the remainder being natural gas, and to build it in a sunny place with plenty of land and gas pipelines, like West Texas. Solar and batteries would cover most of the generation, and the natural gas would cover the times of the year when solar production is low, like the middle of winter. Yes, it is possible to build a 100% solar and battery-based off-grid system today, but it would roughly double the electricity cost. However, that could change in the next 3 to 5 years, and that's for 2 reasons. First, gas turbine manufacturers are dragging their feet on expanding production, so gas generators are sold out until 2030. There is still some generation out there that can be purchased at the right price or acquired with enough effort, but it's limited. Why don't gas turbine makers expand production more quickly? That brings us to the second reason why 100% solar and battery systems will become more likely over time. The cost of solar and batteries are plummeting, so it's likely that by 2030, natural gas may just add cost and complication for a company that wants to build its own grid. If you had a natural gas turbine factory, why would you expand production if you can see that within the next 5 years that there will be another, more scalable and cost-competitive technology eating up your market share? It makes more sense to just keep producing gas turbines on fully depreciated equipment until there's no longer demand for them. What about other generation technologies? Let's run through the ones that are the most likely to come up in the comments. First, nuclear. In the US, we aren't going to see nuclear power at any large scale of deployment before 2035. Yes, the Trump administration is pushing hard on advanced nuclear reactors, but most are still currently at the prototype stage. After that will be full-scale commercial reactors, and then only after that will we see those nuclear reactors produced at high enough quantities to generate low-cost power. Each of those steps will take several years. Second, geothermal. There are new geothermal technologies that do look very promising, but they're still at the prototype stage. So even if new geothermal technologies are successfully commercialized, it will likely be 2035 before we see them at scale. Third, new coal generation is too expensive. Existing plants will keep running, and some shuttered plants will be restarted due to strong electricity demand, but that's about as far as it will go. Fourth, any type of hydroelectric power and pumped hydro is geographically limited, often faces public pushback, and takes a long time to build, so it's mostly a no-go. Fifth, wind. Wind power is currently roughly at cost parity with solar, but the cost of solar is dropping more quickly, which means that in the future, in most cases, solar will be the preferred option. With all that said, some people might point out that solar, natural gas, and batteries face their own challenges as generation options. And that's true, but the challenges are less severe. Starting with solar, it's currently facing political headwinds. However, that will only slow deployments, not stop them. Let's look at two examples. First, the Trump administration has said that they'll no longer approve solar projects, but that only applies to projects on federal lands or that receive federal funds. They can't do much to stop private companies from building their own solar projects off-grid. Second, solar faces headwinds from both tariffs and a loss of tax credits for solar. The impact of those costs could kneecap grid-based solar deployments for over a decade. However, I think it's going to be a different story for off-grid deployments for data centers, and they'll be relatively immune to those headwinds. Why? Power only makes up about 10 to 11% of the cost of AI cloud compute, which means tech companies can afford to pay a premium for the electricity with little effect on their bottom line. Their main concern is speed of deployment and scalability, which is where solar panels shine. They can be deployed rapidly and are available in huge quantities. As a side note, why is the production of solar panels scaling so quickly, and why is their cost dropping so rapidly? Because they're simple to mass produce using high throughput, highly automated, repetitive processes. That's as opposed to, for example, a natural gas generator, wind turbine, or nuclear plant that involve thousands of non-identical parts, which makes mass production and therefore scaling more complicated, slower, and costly. Moving on to gas generation, besides the difficulty of manufacturing the equipment itself, even one highly efficient combined cycle gas turbine requires billions of cubic feet of gas per year to operate. That means developing and maintaining a huge amount of infrastructure to supply that gas, not to mention the cost of the gas itself. That's as opposed to solar panels, which have their fuel, photons, delivered weightlessly through space, directly from the sun, for free. That means relatively high upfront costs, but lower costs over the life of the asset. Moving on to batteries, their primary drawback is that they need to be combined with other generation technologies to be useful. But in doing so, they provide such extraordinary utility that the market for battery grid storage products is exploding. That's because they increase the commercial viability of whatever on- or off-grid system they're plugged into. If they're combined with fixed generation like nuclear, for example, they can step in to cover power demand surges. And if they're combined with intermittent generation like solar, for example, they can store the cheap, zero marginal cost power from the production peaks and release it later. With all that in mind, it should help explain why in the next few years that the best combination of technologies to use for an off-grid system is solar and batteries with a splash of natural gas. Then, when the cost of solar and batteries comes down even further, switch to a system that's fully powered by solar and batteries. And that roughly aligns with Elon's estimates. Although his reasoning was more likely tied to scalability, he said that for a data center of around 100 gigawatts, which should happen in about 5 years or so, the best option is probably solar and battery powered. With that in mind, let's look at how Elon expects to source the solar and battery capacity necessary to support 1 terawatt of compute. As for the battery storage, for Elon's companies at least, I don't see a bottleneck for the foreseeable future. That's because Tesla is aggressively expanding their production of megapacks. Yes, those megapacks are dependent on battery supply, but globally there's a huge and growing supply of battery cells, and Tesla's working on their own in-house supply. However, with solar panels, things get more interesting. Let's take a look. Globally, there's already at least 1.2 terawatts of solar panel production capacity, of which only about half is being utilized. That means Elon's companies don't necessarily need to get into solar panel manufacturing to achieve Elon's compute ambitions. If that's the case, why is Elon teasing that it could be on the table? First, it may just be that he's not necessarily looking at manufacturing solar panels in-house, but rather forming a tight partnership to manufacture solar panels like Tesla did with Panasonic and batteries. However, if Elon's ambitions outpace his suppliers, which often happens, Elon will bring it in-house. Second, it might be worth manufacturing solar panels in-house just for the cost benefits. Currently, solar panels cost several times more in the US than anywhere else in the world. If the panels were manufactured in the United States by Tesla using highly automated facilities to reduce tariff and other costs, they could reduce the cost of their solar panels by at least 50% and likely closer to 70%. How much could that save? 1 terawatt of compute would likely require something like 10 terawatts of solar panels to cover the fact that those panels will only generate power about 25% of the time, and will have to be overbuilt to cover difficult periods like the middle of winter. A 50 to 70% cost reduction, or around 25 cents per watt, would net $2.5 trillion on 10 terawatts of solar panels, making in-house production worthy of serious consideration. Lastly, besides removing potential scaling constraints and offering cost reductions, a third reason Elon might bring solar panel production in-house is if it becomes necessary for space-based compute, which may require specialized panels. But that's a topic for another video. Either way, whether the solar panels are produced in-house or purchased from a third party, building a terawatt of solar in the desert for AI compute could be done at low cost and as quickly as xAI or any other company could throw solar panels on the ground. In fact, as I said in the last video, it might actually be cheaper to go off-grid, because 2/3 of the cost of electricity is the extension cord, so to speak, that runs from the generation source to the data center. Another way to save money by going off-grid would be to strictly use DC power. The way AI data centers are run and powered currently is by taking mid or high voltage AC power from the grid and stepping it down to lower DC voltages to run the compute. That takes a lot of power conversion equipment and causes some of the power to be lost as heat energy. With an off-grid system, the power conversion could be mostly eliminated because solar panels and batteries naturally operate using DC power. Creating a purely DC setup would take a large initial investment, but if the ultimate goal is 1 terawatt of compute and beyond, it would be worth it. So I think it's inevitable for the same reason that Tesla completely re-engineered the electrical system of their vehicles. Inefficiencies compound at scale. The question is, when will that happen? In the past 2 years, xAI has built their Colossus 1 and 2 data centers, which I would consider version 1.0. Then, within the next 3 to 5 years, I expect them to build their first off-grid data centers that reach towards 100 gigawatts of compute, which I'd consider version 2.0. Version 2.0 could use something similar to Heron Link, shown on screen. which would eliminate several components from the data center power supply. Then, within maybe 5 to 7 years from now, they could have enough engineering headroom and will have had enough development time to make a version 3.0 data center that uses end-to-end DC, which could be the architecture that eventually takes them to 1 terawatt of compute. That's a wild guess on my part, so take it with a grain of salt. But I think it's a very real possibility given Elon's constant drive to eliminate parts and complexity. With centralized compute out of the way, let's briefly cover the distributed compute that will be used in products like Optimus robots and robotaxis, which could demand an order of magnitude more power than the data centers. Distributed compute is a more complex topic to cover because rather than involving singular data centers owned by individual companies that can operate their own off-grid generation, it will involve thousands of hardware and software products owned by millions of people that will be powered by a variety of generation sources. With that in mind, these are the broad strokes. For the compute itself, the deployment will be straightforward. The CPUs in many existing smart products will be replaced with AI chips, and there will be a variety of new products and services like robots and robotaxis. It's generating and delivering the power to that constellation of devices that will become tricky. The power could be delivered by the grid, or it could be generated more closely to those devices with rooftop solar and batteries. Each of those solutions face issues. For grid-based power, it takes, on average, 5 years to connect new power generation. And as I said a moment ago, it's costly to maintain the transmission and distribution to deliver that power, which makes up most of the cost of electricity. Rooftop solar is often the best and cheapest way to generate power because it sidesteps the drawbacks of building on the grid. But even in a best-case scenario, rooftop solar would provide only about 1.1 terawatts of power. That's because there's a finite amount of roof area. Not all roofs are structurally suitable for solar. They receive too much shade, or they aren't at the correct angle or face the wrong direction. In my view, this means we need to solve the fundamental problems associated with grid-based power. Stanford's 6 big ideas to help avoid a U.S. electricity crisis suggest ways to do just that. And for me, the most critical of those are streamlining permitting, making grid policies more flexible, and modernizing utility operations. With those changes in place, the free market would deliver the 10 terawatts or more of power generation that will be required for Earth-based distributed AI compute. In summary, for the foreseeable future, the clearest path to Elon's goal of 1 terawatt of centralized compute is solar and batteries deployed in the desert, with natural gas generation necessary in the short term and becoming optional in the long term. Deeper into the future, there may be other options like advanced nuclear and geothermal to firm up the solar and batteries, but they won't form the bulk of the generation. The question is, how long will it take Elon to hit 1 terawatt of compute? Estimates are that globally, we could need 2.6 terawatts of compute for AI by 2035, and by 2040 it could be as much as 11 terawatts. If that holds true, it indicates to me that if Elon's companies take a reasonable share of the global market, that they'll hit 1 terawatt of compute between 2035 and 2040. That sounds unbelievable because it's the equivalent of matching the totality of the current power generation from the U.S. grid in 10 to 15 years. However, most of the solar panel production necessary to achieve that is already in place. So it really comes down to whether the market is willing to fund such an aggressive build-out, and how much companies like TSMC, Samsung, Nvidia, and Tesla expand their chip production. I think the market will provide the funding, or it could end up being self-funding when it gets moving. That's because AI will provide mental and physical labor that's better than human labor at a small fraction of the cost, meaning huge demand and therefore huge revenues. The next logical step after off-grid data centers on Earth is to start building them in space, which is what I'll cover in my next video of the series. As always, please consider supporting the channel with the links in the description, which now also includes a referral link for Signature Solar. If you use that link to purchase home battery or solar equipment, it nets me a small percent-based credit, but that can add up on a large purchase and it really helps the channel. On that note, a special thanks to my YouTube members, ex-subscribers, and all the other patrons listed in the credits. I appreciate all of your support, and thanks for tuning in.